So as an icebreaker, we'll have a poll that we would like to share, which is pretty much what roles are you involved with right now. So there may be more than one. So let's apply the poll and click on any that matches your situation. Now I don't see the poll thing anymore. So maybe Ainsley, there we go. And tell us what brought you here, in which category you feel. And as I said, more than one may apply. So just click on whatever you need. And we'll share the results as soon as we get participation on that. All right, so we have majority of instructors, but we have pretty much everything except teaching assistants, one program director, so that's pretty nice. And course designers. I assume that everyone who's teaching, everyone who's an instructor is in some way a course designer. We are always changing things and trying to make our courses better. So yeah, this was really good to get to know the audience. We can stop sharing and move on. This is a workshop about learning outcomes. So I almost forgot to include the learning outcomes for the workshop. So I was editing those last night. So by the end of today, you should be able to define learning outcomes at different hierarchical levels. We'll explain what those are, list and explain 6 attributes of good learning outcomes, then articulate some important considerations for writing good learning outcomes at those levels that you have learned before, and describe the Canvas Outcomes tool and its main functionalities. Then you would also want to explain how the Canvas tool can be implemented. And I wish that by the end you can go back to your course and click on those options and just get it up and running. And finally, not finally, there's a couple more, but list some limitations of the Canvas Outcomes tool and develop strategies for improving your own learning outcomes and use the Canvas Outcomes tool in your courses. I think these are a higher level objective here. I'll also tell you that what this workshop is not, it's not a sophisticated scholarly presentation on learning outcome development. It's also not a profound explanation about the complex epistemology of learning outcomes and educational taxonomies. Myself, not an expert on that. I am just a practitioner trying my best. This is also not a magical event that will turn you into a Canvas Outcomes expert. It really needs hands-on practice. It needs you to actually do it, go through the process, feel the pain in some cases of the limitations and get it up and running. So I hope that the expectations are at an appropriate level. So let's start with the overview of learning outcomes. We have different definitions. There's a lot of literature about this. I try to simplify it and get the exact definitions from different sources. So a learning outcome in general is a measurable, observable, and specific statement that clearly indicates what a student should be able to do as a result of learning. As you will see, there are different levels of that. If you're a program director, you may be interested in program learning outcomes. That's defined as an intended effect of the program educational experience that has been stated in terms of specific observable and measurable student performance. This is from the literature. And some include stream learning outcomes. Maybe your program has specializations or minors or something like that, which would require a separate set of outcomes. And then, of course, there are course learning outcomes. These are learner-focused statements of what students are intended to do. Note the word intended there. Know, demonstrate, or master by the end of the course. So I think most of us will be working more at that level. And the word intended, which appears in both definitions, even though it comes from different sources, is because when we teach, we also teach things that we don't intend to teach. So students get more than what we think from the learning experience. So that's why people have included that definition. So below that would be an activity learning outcome is something really specific that students acquire from an assignment, from a discussion, from any activity during the classroom. Of course, these are scaffolded, so they all feed into each other. But you also see the definition of learning objectives. Here I got that definition from CTL in the Okanagan campus. It's a specific foci, which I learned is the plural of focus for a lecture or lab lesson. So these are objectives from what learners will be able to do upon successful completion of the course. So these are more related to the activity learning outcomes. So these are different definitions, and you may find more in the literature. It's a bit complicated, but that's roughly what we have. And then, as you can imagine, these are hierarchical. So they should be hierarchical. You have a set of program learning outcomes, then different course learning outcomes coming from different courses, and then different activities as well. To complicate things a little more, we may have what we call accreditable competencies. So many of our programs may have accreditation standards by third-party entities. These are the ones that I am concerned about. I am program director of the Forest Management and Forest Operations programs, and so we have our programs accredited with the Canadian Board of Accreditation of Forest Board, and which also is linked to the provincial accreditation. They're pretty much the same, but we are now in the process of accrediting the program with the Society of American Foresters so that our students are able to become professionals in the United States. And one of my programs also has a pathway to obtain a professional engineering designation. So this has kept me awake for a couple of months, because we're in that process of getting that. So it's really important that our competencies actually match our course and program learning outcomes at that level. So I'll give you some examples of the different outcomes that I am working on in the programs. We don't have a comprehensive set of program learning outcomes. We do have some, but we're improving them. So one could be infer the effect of forestry activities on water resources, wildlife, soils, and biochemical cycles, for example. Then one course learning outcome that is associated to that can be quantify the effect of forest harvesting on the magnitude and frequency of flooding. That could be a course learning outcome that we have in our watershed hydrology course. And an activity could be construct pre- and post-harvest flood frequency curves based on paired watershed data. So you see how these feed into each other, and they have this hierarchical nature that is really important. There could be another course learning outcome from a completely different course. We have this one, describe common approaches for managing and conserving wildlife populations. You know, the forests are at the interface of water, wildlife, and many other environmental elements. So you would have a program learning outcome tied to many different course learning outcomes. And an activity learning outcome for this course could be develop a management plan that optimizes timber extraction and caribou habitat quality. So that could be something. I looked into some of the these are actually existing accreditable competencies, both for the Canadians and the Americans, using those logos that you see there. And our task is to actually match those. I don't want you to follow every one of those arrows, but this is pretty much what we're trying to do when we do accreditation. So some tips about this will come after, but this is somehow the idea of this scaffolding of these different levels of outcomes. Feel free to interrupt me at any moment if you have questions, because I need to see my slides and the notes. I don't see the chat or anything related to Zoom, so any of the other hosts can let me know if there's something worth addressing. All right, so creating good learning outcomes, there are a few attributes. Again, there's a lot of literature about this. They must contain an action, subject, content, and the context. I'll give you some examples. They must be measurable. These are also related to the first point, the verbs, that the observable action. I think most of us go straight into Bloom's taxonomy to find a verb that matches what we are intending to do. But if we don't choose the right verb, then the outcome may not be measurable. So measurable could be as simple as complete or incomplete, or a scale, 10 out of 10 points. it must be transferable. It must be valid in alternative situations, not just the specific example or the classroom. It must be applicable beyond the classroom as well. It must be realistic, appropriate level of difficulty. Note that there may be different attributes depending on the type of outcome. If it's a program learning outcome, a course learning outcome, I just put some of the generic good things that an outcome must have. And it must be clear. If a student struggles to understand what you're intending to say in the outcome, then that's not good, right? Some considerations when writing learning outcomes at any level. Start, which is highlighted there in red, start with learning outcomes from the learner's point of view. And by start, I mean what we're typically used to do is we have our course, it's already there, we teach our topics, and then we kind of add the learning outcomes. And we should really think of starting with the learning outcomes and then creating the content that is optimum for that learning outcome, and always be in the shoes of the student. We should also have an appropriate number of learning outcomes per category. So how many? There's varying opinions about this in the literature. I would say no more than 10. But if you have a 12 credit course that has a lot of content, then you may need more learning outcomes. And I think at the course level, again, some people say 7. With my accreditation exam experience, I've seen courses that have only 3 and they're really big learning outcomes, and then you try to put many different competencies on that, then that means that we need to subdivide them a bit. So again, there's no magic number, but something to consider. An adequate level of specificity, obviously a program learning outcome will be a bit broader, a bit more general, but as you get into the course learning outcomes and activity learning outcomes, then it would be more specific. And always ensure there's a good alignment between all those different categories and the accreditable competencies, if applicable. And it may be tricky. I have suffered a bit with this because you have to kind of match the terminology that they're using, but you have a different set of outcomes. If you go back to look at the arrows that I showed in the previous slide, you see that it's really sometimes not that straightforward, and we must keep improving on that. We also need to avoid modifiers, so critically apply or successfully evaluate, so that those types of words are not good. Non-accessible outcomes, such as the ones you see in the upper right corner that are generic, like understand, know, appreciate, be familiar with, those are not really things that you can measure. And some I've heard different opinions on multiple verbs, so try to stick to one, maybe 2 at the most. Sometimes it really flows nicely, especially with program learning outcomes. You're made to capture different levels, but be careful with using too many verbs. I would say no more than 2. And then use verbs from all domains and appropriate level. So I'll expand on that because when we Google Bloom's taxonomy, most of the time it just shows us the cognitive domain. But I'll show you that that is just the tip of the iceberg. Look at that animation. I hope you like the iceberg. This is just the cognitive domain. And there are others. There are the affective, psychomotor, metacognitive, and interpersonal domains that show so many other verbs. And of course, different programs will have different uses of these verbs, but in general, you would be surprised at how many of the other domains are applicable to any situation. So in any course, you may find the opportunity to use more than one domain and explore other options. These domains, I'm not going to get too much into these circles. Some say that the circle representation is better in the sense that you can expand it, you can add more verbs. There is a hierarchy when you think of that pyramid that I showed before, because it tends to increase the level of difficulty as you go up in the pyramid. But these circles from the Atkinson book that I'll share They start at 12 o'clock and then you would go clockwise. And it shows so many different things. So again, I encourage everyone to look at these other domains, and you will have a link to those. They have these proto-verbs, these verbs that are the principal verbs, and in the second circle you would see some verbs that are either a synonym or related to the proto-verbs. So these are just examples. I won't go through each one of those. But the psychomotor domain, for example, is related to doing things more with your hands. It could be something as simple as using a piece of software or knowing how to fall a tree with a chainsaw. So these are all the things. The affective domain is related to how, an example would be professional behaviors. How do you respond to things? How do you react? How do you interact with people, though that's also part of the interpersonal domain. The metacognitive domain is understanding how you learn to learn, thinking about your own thinking, understanding how you get your knowledge, and so on. So these are the different verbs that you include in those different domains. So here's an example of learning outcomes with different components and associated to each one of these domains. So I won't go through each one of these. I want people to be able to check more in the PDF that will be shared, but it's really important to see that these outcomes have the verb, they have the subject, and they have the context. The context may or may not be needed. If you include it, it'll make the learning outcome stronger. And so this is just a really simple way of writing these domains in the different, writing these outcomes in the different domains. I could go on and on about this. We could have other tables showing one table per domain and then different levels, going through those different proto-verbs that I have mentioned before for each one of those outcomes, but then we would never finish this workshop. So these are some resources. Again, I won't get into those one by one. When you have the PDF in your hands, when you click on those arrows, you will go to the links. So I found this book by Atkinson, Simon Atkinson, really good. It's a very short, I have it right here. It's a very thin book, really practical, really interesting. And for example, they allow you to purchase the big poster with all those domains. I have purchased mine, but it's not yet in my office because of the Canada Post strike. But it's a really good book, and there's just tons of information about this online. Just you will never get bored about this. Some you may find a bit conflicting, a bit different, but you will find your own way of simplifying things for the appropriate use of learning outcomes. And the other resource is obviously the Canvas Outcomes Guide. So the link is again in that arrow. You will be able to click on it, but it shows everything about the outcomes tool that I'm about to show you. Okay, and I'm also going fast-paced because we would allow them to hopefully have questions at the end. So that is another reason. But again, feel free to interrupt me at any point, and someone needs to notify me with the microphone because I don't see anything from Zoom right now. Okay, so the outcomes, the Canvas Outcomes tool, this is a built-in resource in Canvas. It allows you to index your learning outcomes and align them with individual assessments. As we will show you, that may include questions, assignments, discussions, anything you need, right? And then it uses an algorithm to calculate a mastery index level. So it's simply it's a different way of organizing information. We typically have assignments with question banks, and they're all loose and dispersed. This technology will allow you to get them together in that way by outcome. So classify everything by outcome. It is an underutilized tool in university, in UBC, and it is something that would require a learning management system. I don't imagine these being practical if you don't have a computer doing it for you in the background. Why do we need it? Because students pass courses without us knowing what their specific gaps are. So maybe a student passed with an 80%, and so what is missing there at the outcome level? What are the different aspects that need to be strengthened? Traditional gradebooks do not illustrate this at the learning outcome level, do not illustrate performance, similar to that. We don't have an index, we don't have a way of quantifying how our learning outcomes are being fulfilled, and if they're not fulfilled, what do we need to do to adjust our teaching, our learning materials, and so on. And so what would you get from Canvas? You will see in screenshots following this, but basically you will be able to track mastery of learning outcomes at the group level and at the individual level, and students can also visualize those outcomes and see what are they mastering and what they're not. Okay, fantastic. So there are different ways of linking outcomes to the different teaching materials. So I assume most of you use classic quizzes, new quizzes, and then we have assignments and discussions in Canvas. And we use those for different purposes, but there's not a single way of doing this. So outcomes can be linked at different levels depending on the tool you're using. So for example, in classic quizzes, you typically rely on question banks. You cannot use an outcome for an individual question, or at least not do it through the questions and then click on the question and say align it to this outcome. You have to do it through the question bank. So we'll go through some of these, and the gray ones are not applicable, but at the end you can always link outcomes via rubrics, as you see in the last column. But this workshop focuses on this part, just classic quizzes and rubrics for either the quizzes or the assignments. I'll give you the example for an assignment. And so this is what you would do. If you have a Canvas course handy right now, feel free to try to follow this, but be careful with that, because if you lose track, you may get frustrated and don't see what is coming. So just be cautious of that, but you can try it out if you wish. The first thing is you need to activate the Outcomes tab and the Learning Mastery Gradebook. They're not there by default. So you go to Settings in your course, Navigation, and in this case, that has already been put in the activated section, but if you scroll down, you will see it in the list below. And so that would be the first thing. And then you also need to activate the Learning Mastery Gradebook, which comes with the outcomes. So go to Settings, Feature Options, and Learning Mastery Gradebook. You just click on it, and then that green check will appear. Then how to create the outcomes, how to index the outcomes. You click on the Outcomes section, then you may classify them by groups or not. If you're implementing course learning outcomes, groups may not be needed, but you can do it. And then you click on Create to do your first outcome. What appears would be this window. I only highlight the name part because I only put things there. I didn't see a need for the friendly name or the description, but these are all the details that if you are implementing these, you can go further and check it in more detail. I'll show you how it looks in my case, but I just enter a coded numbered outcome there. So 1.1 dash and whatever the outcome is in that single box called name. If you scroll down from that same window, you will see that you have different ways of calculating these and even changing the category name. So you have these exceeds mastery, mastery, near mastery, below mastery. This is the default settings, going from 0 points to 4 points, as you can see in the screenshot. And then you can also change the calculation method. So there are different ways. The default one is the weighted average that I keep. There's all others there, decaying average, most recent score. The only thing I will say about the calculation algorithm is that it's an algorithm. So Canvas will try to get different questions in chronological order. So for example, the weighted average, it says the most recent result, whatever item question was asked at last. That is the question that has 65% of mastery, and then the average of all the others count as 35%. This means that for you to have a robust calculation, you need multiple questions per outcome to be evaluated. We'll get a bit more into that, but I won't get into the details of these calculation methods. It's something for people to explore and evaluate. So I have found the defaults okay. The most recent score, for example, will just take the last question, and that may not be the best. You want some sort of moving average as the student is progressing and mastering questions in the different in a given outcome. Okay. This is how they look like when you have these are just two examples of one of my courses. So that's how I wrote them. It's really important to number them because then you keep track of how they're classified. So I had outcomes per lecture. So these were, I know, from lecture 1. And so I strongly advise you to find a numbering system for this. And then how to link question banks to outcomes. So the previous slide shows your outcomes are created. They're all indexed in your Canvas outcomes section. Now we need to link them. So I'll show you the example for quizzes through question banks. This is classic quizzes. So you would go to quizzes and then find the 3 dots there, manage question banks, add the question bank. And this is, of course, how they looked like when I added the questions already. So you can see that I have different outcomes, and you can already see the number of questions in the screenshot. And so once you have those, then you can start linking each one of those with a given learning outcome. With this approach, it really means that you need one question bank per outcome, or you could have multiple, but they all need to be aligned to a single outcome for them to work properly. And so, as you can see, they match exactly what I had before for the outcomes. They're called exactly the same. These are question banks, and they're titled exactly in the same way. Just I chose to be simple with that approach. Okay. So once you have the question bank there, you would click on Align Outcome. And what would appear is all your outcomes that you have already filled in the previous step. And then you just choose one. And then you would see that there's a mastery level that you can set at this point. The default is 60%. I always raise it up to 90. I think 60 is a bit low for mastery. So I just tweak those to be 90, but you have to be careful to remember to do it. Okay, so you do that, and below you see all the other defaults that have been already applied. You cannot edit them there. You have to edit them in the learning outcomes. And then that's good. You will populate your question banks with questions coded according to your needs. This is the code that I chose. So the 2.4 that you see there is the learning outcome. So that's why the numbering is important. And I chose to just put levels of difficulty. So I have level 0, level 1, level 2. There are level 3 that are not shown there. And that kind of shows me where to put those. So the level 0s are for what I call the pre-lecture quizzes, level 1s and 2s maybe for the quizzes, level 3s and up for the midterm and exam. So they kind of follow some sort of difficulty level, but the coding allows me to pick the questions appropriately when I populate my assignments. So that is it. So you have those questions populated, and you can see here, let me get my pointer. You can see here that the outcome has already been aligned. So you have the title of the question bank, you have the aligned outcome that they both match, and now we have the questions that are also coded to match. I think those are really important steps. You can find your own way of coding the questions, of putting more information in this box. This box is good because students don't see that label that you put there, so I just found it useful to do it like that. And then you choose your questions for your quizzes or midterms or whatever you need, or assignments. So this is a multiple choice selection in a group for one of my tests, and then you would see the questions. Again, the coding is really good because you'll see what outcome they belong to, as I show there, and then that's it. So that's it for linking question banks to outcomes and then populating your assignments or your quizzes with those questions. And then how to link assignments to outcomes, assignments in general. So I created this test assignment in my sandbox, and you do it through a rubrics. So you would add a rubric. So you create the outcome first, add the rubric, and here you see find outcome. So when you click on that, it'll go to all of your outcomes, and then you will be able to put that in there. Okay? So once you do that, you will see this option of using this criterion for scoring. So I have already added that outcome. This is optional if you want to for the outcome evaluation to be part of the grade. You may or may not want that. You may want the score just to feed to the Learning Mastery Gradebook that we will see in a second. But I always keep that in as checked because I want to include that in the grade, but it's your choice. It'll still fit to the Learning Mastery calculation, but it all depends if you want to use it for grading or not as a score. Okay? So then you see this is the final outcome rubric. You may see that you can include other criteria. So you have writing quality, for example. This is a really simple example, and the outcome itself is there. It already has the 4 points because that's the way you chose to calculate mastery. And finally, you create the rubric and it's good to go. So when you go back to that and try to grade in the speed grader, you will see the box where you can enter the mastery manually yourself. So this is probably good for discussions or open-ended questions that need manual grading. And so then the fifth step will be how to interpret. How does this look, right? So for you to visualize the Learning Mastery, you would go to Grades, and then you have this drop-down menu. You would choose the Learning Mastery Gradebook, and this is how it looks like. Let me introduce you to the Learning Mastery Gradebook. Of course, student names were here, so I hid them, and then you'll see this beautiful color-coded table where you have reds, oranges, greens for different levels of mastery at the student level. So each one of these rows is a student, and you have the different outcomes in the columns. And so if you hover your mouse over each of these, you will see the course level evaluation of mastery. And so that is a really good representation of an outcome that is doing okay, I think. This is another one that is not doing so okay. So we have only 49% of the students exceeding mastery, and there's a lot of below mastery in that one. So you can then explore what is going on, adjust your teaching, or emphasize this outcome a bit more with the students. So this is the gradebook view of the Learning Mastery. What students would see is something like this. So they see all the outcomes, and then they can see if they have mastered the outcome or not. So here you have one that says not mastered, and mastered. Okay. So this is a view for students, a bit less colorful, but if they click on that arrow, if you go and try to expand that, this is what they see. So they would see that they had an evaluation of this outcome in the midterm and another one in this lecture 1 post-lecture quiz. Both are doing fine. Okay. And then, of course, interpreting means then you take action. So if things are not going well, then this is what you would do. In essence, this is a very simplified way of looking at it. But if a few students score low on a specific learning outcome, it may reflect more on the students. So you would then give them some extra attention, provide some course materials, maybe extra attempts in the quizzes that were related to that outcome, and so on, right? If a large number of students score low, then that I believe is more a reflection on us, and so therefore maybe evaluate the alignments with the learning outcomes, review the number of learning outcomes that they're being incorporated in these different assessments and so on. Okay, so I won't get into the details, but this is roughly what you would do. Okay, so that's fantastic, and I will now turn it to Busong.
Thank you, Antoine. So next slide, please. So in 2022, Professor Bahola and his student received a student as Partners Fund. And I first met Professor Bahola through consultation session, where he asked a question about Canvas outcomes and learning management gradebook features. He already mentioned that this feature has been underutilized by instructors at UBC, according to LT Hub. And through our networking, we got to know that there was only one instructor at UBCO who has implemented these Canvas outcomes with new quizzes. So collaborating with LT Hub, we took this as our opportunity to learn more about Canvas outcome features and learning management gradebooks. Primary objective of this project were conducting comprehensive revision of existing outcomes, and we fully implemented activity and lesson level learning outcomes in two courses, Forestry 100 and Forestry 304. These two courses teach the same content, and students in these two courses are assessed in the same way. And there were three surveys that we conducted at the beginning of the course, and mid-survey and post-term survey. Today, I'm going to share preliminary data analysis, including student perceived understanding about learning outcomes and their usefulness of their study and education process. And we are going to share their engagement with Canvas outcomes and a learning management gradebook. And we are also going to share their perceived easiness and usefulness of the tool and interpretation of the information from Learning Management Gradebook. We plan to conduct full analysis with the help from an evaluation expert. So in pre-survey, we asked the student roughly how frequently their professors included explicit course level learning outcomes in their syllabi. And about 50% of the total 117 students who responded to the survey reported that more than 75% of their professors included course level learning outcome in their syllabi. UBC syllabus policy mandates that a syllabus should include a course level learning outcome. Considering this policy, this finding is a bit lower than what we have expected. For lecture and learning activity level learning outcome, about 30% reported that. Antoine, can you can you play? Yeah, thank you. About 30% reported that more than 75% of their professors included the lecture and learning activity level learning outcomes in the courses. Next slide, please. So the bar chart in this slide report the student perceived level of learning outcome about student perceived the level of understanding about the learning outcome from pre-survey and post-survey. First, the post-survey result indicates that about 89% reported that they know what a learning outcome is and have a good understanding about what a learning outcome is. So our students report that they have pretty good understanding about learning outcomes from beginning. And the implementation of the Canvas outcomes and Learning Mastery Gradebook in these two courses seem to have enhanced the student understanding of learning outcome a little bit, because in the post-survey, the proportion of students with a good understanding, you see that decreased from 62 to 52, likely reflecting the shift toward the exact understanding category. And additionally, the percentage percentage for the kind of know what it is, but not entirely sure, it decreased from 11% to 5%. It demonstrates reduced uncertainty after the implementation. Next slide, please. The bar chart in this slide reports student perception on the usefulness of the learning outcome in their studying and overall education process. Again, we are sharing the result from pre and post surveys. The pre-survey result indicates that about 79% of students perceived learning outcome either very useful, 33% from pre-survey, or somewhat useful, 46% from the same pre-survey. And the educational intervention of the Canvas outcome and learning mastery gradebook, it seems like it has enhanced the student perceived usefulness of learning outcome. Because in the post survey, you can see that the proportion of the student with the neutral category that decreased slightly from 17% to 9%, likely reflecting a shift toward the somewhat useful category. Next slide, please. And regarding the level of student engagement with the Learning Mastery Gradebook, the midterm and post-survey results show moderate engagement with the Learning Mastery Gradebook and Canvas outcomes. Specifically, 56% from midterm survey and 50% from post-survey reported that they checked the learning management gradebook sometimes. Additionally, 5% reported that they checked it all the time. And 29%, and 29% from midterm survey and 32% from the post survey, they reported that they checked it rarely, sometimes. So Canvas tracks student activity using two data points, page view and participation. So we looked the learning analytics data briefly. And one of the pages they can track is Canvas outcomes page. We noticed that students visit the Canvas outcomes page more frequently before midterm and final exam. Next slide, please. So regarding easiness of the tool and interpretation of the data drawn from the Learning Management Gradebook, total 79% of students reported that the Canvas outcomes and Learning Management Gradebook tool were either very easy to access and navigate, or easy, 50% from student to respondent, to access and navigate those tools. Compared to easiness of the tool, about 69% reported that the Learning Management Gradebook data were very easy or easy to interpret. So it's about 10% lower than easiness of the tool. So overall, we think that this indicates that some students need some guidance in using and interpreting the data drawn from Learning Management Gradebook. Here's one written feedback from student. I think in class tutorial of how to use the learning outcomes and mastery gradebook would make navigating the pages easier. Next slide, please. So regarding usefulness of learning management gradebook, 60% of the student who participated in the survey, in midterm survey, reported that learning management gradebook were either very useful, 10%, or useful, 50% for their learning in this course. In the post-term survey, this percentage decreased about 6% overall, not 60%, 6% overall. It seems the student who reported Learning Management Gradebook as somewhat useful in the midterm survey either moved to either very useful category or changed their position to neutral. So here's one written feedback from student. The learning management gradebook is kind of useless because the assignment given do not cover all of the learning objectives, not an accurate representation of my knowledge. And however, I love the addition of the learning outcomes and use them entirely to study. Another feedback we didn't include in the slide is like those tools help me find out what part I am missing before the midterm exam. I can easily find the missing knowledge, therefore no further help needed. So while Canvas outcome seems generally well received by the student for exam preparation, we think the feedback about the learning management gradebook is quite mixed. Next slide, please. So last question we asked the student was about their preference. Would you prefer other professors to implement this tool in their courses? This is the post survey. It says that about 51% reported that they prefer their professors to implement Canvas outcomes and Learning Mastery Gradebook. 32% loved how the tool had been implemented in Ang Song's course. 19% indicate that the tool could be useful, but they want it to be implemented differently. One student feedback is that I thought that it was beneficial and supplemented most to studying for the midterm and final with outcomes and the learning management gradebook. Very useful, and it allowed me to obtain a better grasp of the material. And this is the first time I used this tool in 5 years of undergraduate at UBC, and I wish it was used sooner by professors in my other classes. It was great. However, we still have 42% reported that they found the tool was neither beneficial or detrimental, and 6% negative feedback about this tool. So again, students reported mixed experience about the Learning Mastery Gradebook, while they reported positive experience toward Canvas outcome feature. So we think the mixed feedback toward Learning Mastery Gradebook is partly due to the tool's limitation and a lack of guidance about their functionality and effective use of those tools for studying. So I will hand this over to Professor Pahola. He will discuss further about the limitation and share his
Thanks so
reflection.
much. Thanks so much, Pusong. So some Canvas limitations that we have encountered. So when you use classic quizzes, if you don't include the outcome, the question bank entirely in a group, and you just pull individual questions and they get disconnected. So you may edit the questions in the quiz and then they are not edited in the question bank, and that will result in a problem for the outcomes algorithm, right? Another annoying thing is the Learning Master Gradebook does not display the learning outcomes in order. This one was even improved a bit, but 2.5, 2.6, and 6.2, 6.4, 6.5, 11.1. It's a bit of a mess, and I don't know why it does that. You can export that as an Excel spreadsheet, and it still shows the columns in a strange order. Instructors and students cannot really visualize which specific questions are underperforming for each learning outcome. So if there's nothing here, if I click on this box, nothing appears, right? So it is just a visual black box interpretation of the outcomes. We've noticed it appears to be a bug that some assignments are not assessed and they have already taken place, and I don't know why is that. So there may be some issues there in the calculation. Also, and I saw a question in the chat about this, Canvas cannot really manage different levels of learning outcomes. You can group them, but you can't scaffold them properly. So this is underutilized. So it's really difficult. And the integration of program learning outcomes is not yet achieved at a higher level. When you look at the outcomes section, you have this option to create that I showed you before. My mouse is weird now, but you also have the find. When you do that, it goes to these preset outcomes that may have added by administrators at a higher level in Canvas. There's pretty much nothing there, so it really shows that we haven't really at UBC incorporated them here for the outcomes to be shared. Different faculties may have different systems, but even in the Faculty of Forestry, which is mine, I was, oh, that's interesting. Let's see. There's nothing there, right? So that's a limitation. And then some lessons learned. Implement Canvas outcomes at the course learning outcome level. What I did in the project is implement them at the lecture level. So I ended up with 126 of them. If you have these limitations of the Learning Mastery Gradebook, putting them not in order, that's not too much. And you have a limited 2.6 alignments per outcome. So the algorithm is working just on 2 questions or 3 on average. So that doesn't help. I think with the limitations that we have, we should focus on implementing those at the course level. If I had to redo this again, that is what I would do. That would lead to a better calculation of the mastery with more items per learning outcome, easier to categorize questions at the broader level. You will have a better overall quantitative evaluation at the course level, so you could get at the end what is the mastery at the course level. Another thing that we learned is students require more active training for navigating outcomes on the Learning Mastery Gradebook, remind them more, and highlight these things more during class. So bring up the learning mastery. Of course, you cannot show them publicly to the students with their names, but bring it up, give them some time to evaluate those, maybe take a screenshot of the outcomes that are not doing well, and have a better feedback process with that. And some concluding remarks. Some conclusions about this whole thing. The development of optimized learning outcomes at different levels is an art. I've been dealing with these and trying to match them with accreditation competencies. It's really something that we must do. It's an art. It's just getting really good learning outcomes is not done really that easily. It should be at the forefront of pedagogical practice. So I put the Last Supper there as an indication of how the art that we need. We need optimum scaffolding of these outcomes at different levels, and the alignment with accredited competencies is really critical for accreditation purposes. It is a very underutilized tool, and I hope that people are using it more and do it at the course learning outcome level, as I indicated before. Students mostly have a positive view about learning outcomes, and also a positive view about the Canvas outcomes tool, a bit less positive, as Bosong indicated. So they love learning outcomes, they completely understand their importance, but clearly the limitations of the tool show when they're trying to use it in a practical way. More work is needed to optimize the use of Canvas outcomes by instructors and students. So I hope that Canvas and Instructor, which is the company that deals with it, puts resources into this and improves everything that we have been talking about. And there's an enormous potential to improve the Canvas outcomes interface to better integrate these learning outcomes at different levels, make it more robust. I would like to thank the CTLT Winter Institute and Ainsley in particular for the help. The Students as Partners Fund that funded this whole thing. It was managed by Rosen Verwoerd. The student partners that worked on this, they did an amazing job in evaluating the learning outcomes that we had, and it was a really amazing work that they did. And I always thank my local UBC forestry support, because they are always there also answering questions about Canvas and everything else. So bibliography, this is just the articles that were cited in the contents, but all of the other resources are there with links when you get the PDFs. Well, it's 2 p.m. exactly, so I really hope that everyone starts using the Canvas Outcomes tool And these slides will be available to you, so you can go. I know it was fast-paced. I know we knew that beforehand. It was not meant for you to follow every single thing, but to have all the instructions in a one-stop place. So I hope that at least that was achieved. And please reach out if you're implementing Canvas outcomes. We would be more than delighted to help. Thanks for being here as well.